He didn't demand access. He didn't raise his voice. He just walked, calmly, confidently, toward a sealed door inside Windsor Castle, and expected it to open. Because when you're the former President of the United States, when you've held the nuclear codes, sat in war rooms, and walked through walls that bend for no one, a quiet hallway in an old palace shouldn't be the thing that stops you. But it did. Because that night, Barack Obama tried to enter the Queen's private archive, and one royal guard stood in his path, didn't blink, didn't speak, didn't move. And what happened next left the entire corridor frozen. Before we show you what happened behind that door, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you never miss these stories that keep tradition alive. Now watch closely. The motorcade had already swept past the outer gates of Windsor before most onlookers realised who was inside. No fanfare, no podium, no cameras flashing in the courtyard, just the quiet hum of security vehicles and the unmistakable silhouette of Barack Obama stepping through the Grand Arch. Even as a former president, he carried himself with that same mixture of ease and authority, shaking hands with a few waiting officials, exchanging warm smiles with staff who recognized him instantly. But after the pleasantries, something unexpected happened. Instead of following his hosts toward the reception room, Obama's stride slowed as he glanced down a quieter passage. It was narrower, lined with carved oak panels, and marked discreetly with a brass plate that read "Private Archive." Most visitors would not have noticed it at all. Obama did. With the relaxed confidence of someone long accustomed to doors opening for him, he adjusted his jacket and began walking toward the corridor. His aides exchanged uncertain looks, but none stepped forward to stop him. Footsteps echoed against stone, the sound amplifying in the hush of Windsor's inner halls. Halfway down the passage, a figure moved. A single royal guard, red tunic catching the low light, stepped forward from his station and blocked the way without a word. Obama slowed, one eyebrow rising at the silent barrier. For a man who had addressed parliaments and commanded armies, it was a rare thing to be halted so firmly and so quietly. Why would a royal guard deny passage to a former US president? The last of the cameras had been packed away hours ago. Windsor Castle was quiet now, the kind of quiet that only existed after the tourists were gone, after the last handshake was offered, and after even the portraits seemed to rest. A motorcade pulled up just past the West Terrace. No fanfare, no press pool, just the subtle choreography that follows someone who no longer holds power, but still carries weight. Barack Obama stepped out of the second vehicle, flanked by two discreet aides. He looked relaxed, shoulders loose, blazer open, tie slightly loosened. The reception was informal, smiles, nods, handshakes. One steward offered a low bow, another led the party toward the reserved guest wing. But Obama wasn't following. His eyes had caught something at the end of a long corridor, something that hadn't been on the tour brief. A small brass plaque beside a sealed wooden door, almost hidden in shadow. "Private Archive, Royal Access Only." He tilted his head, then stepped forward. One hand surely brushed his blazer button. Not fast, not sneaky, just confident. His aides exchanged a glance, but said nothing. The silence of stone and age followed him down the passage. And then the guard moved. Ceremonial red, impossibly still. Until now. One step forward, right hand resting lightly near his waist. Boots perfectly aligned with the edge of the corridor. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Obama stopped, one foot still slightly forward, his brow furrowed, not with offence, but with curiosity. Why was he being stopped? Why here? And who exactly was this man standing in his way? Windsor Castle breathes differently once the public is gone. The corridors feel longer. The footsteps sound older. There's a kind of reverence that settles over the stone after dusk, like the walls themselves remember what they were built to guard. Past the chapel, beyond the long walk's watchful shadow, sits a wing rarely mentioned in official tours. It doesn't house thrones or tapestry. No ceremonial armour lines its halls. This wing is colder, quieter, and sealed. The private archive. Not a museum, not the royal library. This is where monarchs keep what history doesn't get to touch. Letters written in grief. Journals scribbled during war. personal correspondence between heads of state that never saw daylight. It is the monarch's memory, unfiltered, unedited, and untouchable. Entry requires sovereign dispensation. Not even the reigning prime minister can step inside without written clearance from the palace itself. It is, by design, forgotten by most, even among staff. And stationed outside, as tradition dictates, stands a member of the Scots Guards. Tonight, that post belongs to Sergeant Alistair Merton. He hasn't moved in over an hour. Rain has dried on the shoulders of his coat, and the chill in the air has made the gold on his buttons gleam sharper under hallway light. He doesn't speak. He doesn't blink often. He only watches. Because in this part of Windsor, silence is not emptiness. It is protection. And tonight, that silence was about to be tested. Sergeant Alistair Merton had stood guard before kings, queens, generals, and visiting heads of state. He had watched protesters scream from behind iron barriers, and tourists giggle as they posed 2 inches from his shoulder. None of it moved him, not visibly, not even once. He'd earned his place in the Queen's Guard the hard way. Before the red tunic there had been sandstorms. Before the medals there were convoy routes in Helmand Province, roads lined with broken concrete and worse. He had learned there, as a younger man in a different uniform, that survival often depended on stillness and silence. Now, years later, he wore a bearskin hat instead of a Kevlar helmet, but the lesson remained. Stillness could protect people. Silence could carry authority. The battlefield had changed, but the duty had not. Those who mistook him for a ceremonial fixture rarely made the same mistake twice. Merton was respected within the not because he spoke often, but because he didn't need to. He carried out inspections like he was preparing a museum for inspection by its original curator. Every brass button aligned, every edge razor sharp, every crease pulled tight like a drawn bowstring. But more than discipline, there was belief. Merton believed certain things mattered, not because they were tradition, but because they were memory. The private archive wasn't just paper under lock. It was proof that the institution still remembered it was human. That's what he guarded, not just access, but meaning. So when Barack Obama appeared in his peripheral vision that night, walking toward a door few dared to even acknowledge, Merton didn't hesitate. Not because of who was approaching, but because of what stood behind him. Earlier that evening, Barack Obama had arrived at Windsor with no official press schedule, no state dinner on the books, and no grand formalities to fulfill. It was meant to be a quiet, diplomatic courtesy, an informal gesture extended out of respect for his years of service and ongoing humanitarian work. He was met in the inner courtyard by a senior royal liaison, a few discreet guards, and a well-briefed steward who offered a practiced welcome. The encounter was warm, not theatrical. A handshake here, a knowing smile there. Even the castle staff, trained to remain stoic, seemed to carry a trace more warmth than usual. Obama had always been a favourite of sorts, respected across the aisle in diplomatic circles. His presence was familiar, if not entirely expected. He moved through the castle like someone who had walked such halls before, not entitled, just comfortable. During a private supper in one of the smaller reception rooms, conversation ranged from statecraft to literature. Obama charmed the waitstaff with a comment about the paintings. He asked one of the footmen if the castle's underground passages were as confusing as legend claimed. The room laughed, but at one point, just briefly, he glanced at the steward and asked, "Tell me something. Is it true that Churchill and Elizabeth corresponded regularly in their later years? Personal letters, not briefings?" The steward hesitated only slightly. "Some say so, sir, but that would fall under the Queen's private archive." Obama nodded thoughtfully, sipped his wine and let the subject drop, but not entirely. He knew what the private archive was. And while the dinner resumed, that one phrase lingered in his mind like a door left slightly ajar. By the time dessert was served, he already knew he'd try to see it for himself. The castle's atmosphere had shifted. Supper had ended. The plates were cleared. Staff excused themselves with the subtle precision that made Windsor feel less like a palace and more like a ritual, every movement rehearsed, every silence deliberate. Obama stood slowly from the high-backed chair, still cradling a glass of water. His tone was casual when he spoke, as though making a small request on impulse. "Before we turn in," he said, glancing at his steward, "mind if I take a look down that hallway we passed earlier, the one with the old oak doors?" The steward hesitated. "That corridor leads to the private archive, sir. It's not on tonight's rotation." Obama gave a polite smile. "I figured as much. Just a quick peek. I won't open any doors. Curious more than anything." One of his aides stepped in gently. "Mr. President, that area—" But Obama was already moving. Not quickly, not with defiance. Just that calm, deliberate pace that made it hard to say no without seeming petty. He strolled past a side alcove, pausing to admire a bust of Queen Victoria. He commented softly about how much the stone resembled Eleanor Roosevelt, but then he kept going. The corridor ahead narrowed, lit only by warm wall sconces and the glint of polished brass. At the end stood a heavy wooden door with no window and a single plaque affixed beside it. "Private Archive. Monarch's access only." His footsteps echoed louder here. His aides no longer followed. Halfway down the hall, a motion caught his eye. The guard moved. One step. Not aggressive, not alarmed, just precise. Sergeant Merton stood directly in the centre of the corridor now, not blocking, not threatening, just present. A line drawn without drawing a line. Obama slowed. He hadn't expected resistance, not like this, not from someone who wasn't even supposed to speak. And yet, somehow the message couldn't have been clearer. Obama stopped a few paces from the guard. The silence hung in the corridor, not awkward but deliberate, the kind of silence that invited reflection more than confrontation. He offered a small diplomatic smile. "Evening." Sergeant Merton didn't reply. His eyes stayed forward, not directly meeting Obama's, but not avoiding them either. Obama glanced down the corridor, then back at the man standing still as a statue. "Just hoping to take a quick look," he said casually, gesturing toward the archive. "Won't open anything, won't touch anything, just curious." Still nothing. Obama tilted his head slightly. "You do know who I am, right?" His tone was light, half a joke, half a test. At last, Merton spoke. His voice was low and calm, shaped by years of discipline. "I do, sir." "Then you'll understand," Obama said, still smiling. "I've been in a few sensitive rooms in my time. Nuclear command bunkers, situation rooms. I've read documents most people wouldn't believe exist. I think I can be trusted not to tamper with a locked door." Merton nodded once, without stepping aside. "With respect, sir, this corridor is off access without sovereign clearance. Your credentials don't extend here." Obama raised his eyebrow. "I'm not asking for the launch codes, sir. Just a peek at history." Merton's voice didn't rise, didn't harden. "These aren't history, sir. Not yet." That gave Obama pause. His smile faded a touch. "Come again?" "They're still memory, Merton. Still belonging to the ones who wrote them. Until the Crown deems otherwise, they stay protected." Obama studied him for a long moment. The guard wasn't angry, wasn't grandstand. He was simply holding the line. "You're serious," Obama said softly. Merton said nothing. A long beat passed. Then Obama gave a quiet chuckle, more impressed than annoyed. "You're not here to make decisions, but you've already made one." This time the guard's reply was barely more than a breath. "I haven't made anything, sir. I've been given something to hold, and I'm holding it." The corridor felt tighter now, not from pressure, but from principle. Obama adjusted his stance slightly, but didn't move forward. Not yet. Obama took a slow breath, folding his arms, not as a challenge, but as someone re-evaluating a conversation he thought he controlled. "I get protocol, believe me, but I also know when it's flexible." Sergeant Merton didn't move. Obama continued, this time more direct. "You know I held the nuclear codes for 8 years, right? I could approve drone strikes over breakfast. I had the CIA briefing me daily on every intelligence leak across 5 continents. I've been entrusted with more secrets than this place will ever contain." A pause. "So if I want to glance down a hallway, one I'll forget by tomorrow morning, you really think that's above my clearance?" Merton responded evenly. "Sir, with all due respect, this isn't about clearance. It's about custody." "Custody?" Obama echoed. "The Queen's Archive," Merton said, "is sealed under sovereign order, not Parliament, not international agreement. Even the reigning monarch must issue formal dispensation before crossing that threshold." Obama's tone shifted, just slightly. You're telling me even the king can't walk in unannounced? Merton nodded once. Correct. Not without written order, sealed and countersigned. And if I walk past you anyway? Obama asked. His voice was calm, but the weight behind it was unmistakable. The corridor was still now. One of Obama's aides, standing a respectful distance back, stiffened. Another looked toward the steward nearby, uncertain whether to intervene. But Merton's response was unwavering. Then, I insist, in turn, he said. You will not pass. No threat, no posturing, just the quiet certainty of a man who'd already made peace with whatever consequences might follow. Obama took a step forward, but only one. Merton didn't retreat. His right boot shifted a single inch across the floor. Just enough, just clear enough. The message, this wasn't ceremonial anymore. The air between them tightened. In a hallway lined with centuries of paintings and echoes, a former president of the United States was being held back by a man who hadn't even raised his voice. And somewhere in the castle behind them, something sacred remained untouched, not because of the title of the man guarding it, but because of the weight of the memory behind the door. For a moment the silence returned, not stiff, not hostile, but weighty. The kind of silence that asked a question and waited for an honest answer. Obama's gaze lingered on the man before him, unshaken, unmoved, not rude, just resolute. He'd seen that look before, not in Buckingham Palace, not in any state house or press room, but on the tarmac in Bagram, back when things were hotter and every decision felt heavier. He remembered a night in Afghanistan, years earlier, when a young US Marine corporal had blocked his movement toward an unsecured vehicle. The man had barely been out of training, but when Obama's advance team tried to wave him off, the Marine didn't flinch. "Protocol, sir," the Marine had said. "No clearance, no access." Even the commander-in-chief had to wait. At the time, Obama had smiled and stepped back, not because he had to, but because the kid was right. Because that kind of discipline, when it came from below, without anger or ego, meant the institution was still alive. And now, standing in this ancient hallway, half a world away, facing a man wearing red wool and a bearskin hat instead of body armor and fatigues, he felt the same thing. A line, quietly drawn, a line that said, this isn't about who you were, it's about what this place. Obama dropped his arms slowly, his stance loosening. "You've done this before, haven't you?" he said quietly. Merton didn't answer. Obama smiled faintly, more to himself than anyone else. "You remind me of someone." Then he stepped back, not far, just enough, not surrender, not concession, but respect. There was something about being held back, not with force, but with meaning, that carried more gravity than any locked door ever could. For all his years of access, of power, of being waved through barriers without blinking, this time the stop meant something. And strangely, he didn't resent it. Obama remained where he stood, his hands now in his pockets, his shoulders angled slightly toward the guard rather than the door. He didn't try to move forward again, but he didn't turn away either. "Tell me something," he said at last. "What exactly's in there? I've read about the Royal Library, the Churchill Room, the Commonwealth Archive, but this one, it's always a whisper." Sergeant Merton didn't glance at the door. "It's not for history, sir, not yet." Obama's brow creased. "Meaning?" Merton paused, not because he was unsure, but because words had to be weighed here. "History is for books," he said. "For cameras, for the public to interpret. What's behind that door is memory." Still Obama didn't move, but his face changed, just a little. A line of curiosity easing into something closer to understanding. Merton continued. "Private letters, journal entries, notes passed between monarchs and prime ministers that were never meant to be seen, not censored, just unfinished, still human." Obama nodded slowly. "So that's what I was trying to walk into. Someone else's unfinished sentence." Merton didn't reply. He didn't need to. Obama exhaled through his nose slowly. "I read Lincoln's personal letters once, not the ones published, the real ones, after the 150-year seal expired. I remember sitting alone in the National Archives, holding paper that still smelled like coal dust. He wasn't writing for the country. He was writing for his sons, his grief. His voice dropped a little. It didn't feel like reading history, it felt like trespassing. The silence returned, but now it felt mutual, shared. Obama glanced again at the oak door. That room, it's not sealed because it's dangerous. It's sealed because it's still sacred. Merton finally spoke again. Exactly. Obama looked at him, studying the man as if seeing something new. Not a barrier, not a soldier, but a custodian. The kind of figure history rarely writes about, but without whom it cannot exist. He nodded once. I don't envy you, Sergeant. Guarding something no one is allowed to see. Merton's reply was as soft as the corridor's echoes. If it's worth guarding, sir, it's worth not seeing. There it was. The pivot. Not dramatic, not loud, but something had shifted. Obama's posture settled. The moment was no longer about power, it was about presence, about recognizing what should be left untouched. And for the first time since stepping into that hallway, he looked away from the door, not out of defeat, but understanding. The air in the corridor had changed. It wasn't just quiet now, it was reverent. Obama stood still, just feet from the sealed door, the memory of Lincoln's letters still flickering somewhere behind his eyes. He looked down the hallway where he'd come from, where his aides waited, pretending not to be nervous, pretending not to notice the line he was towing. And then, without a word, he stepped forward. Just one step. Merton moved instantly, not aggressively, not even noticeably at first, just enough to make the line visible again. One polished boot, angled forward. One subtle shift of weight. No threat, no command, just position. It said everything. Obama stopped. His eyes met Merton's, finally, directly. No longer the amused glances of a powerful man entertaining resistance. No longer the gentle charm of diplomacy. Just two men and one decision. A breath passed between them. Obama could have insisted, could have turned the moment political, could have leaned on his past titles, the cameras, the expectations that always hovered behind a figure like him. But he didn't. Instead, his shoulders eased, just barely. And then, almost to himself, he spoke. You're right, he said quietly. Some doors aren't mine to open. Merton didn't smile, didn't shift, but the tension between them cracked, just enough for the weight to settle instead of press. Obama took a step back, then another, hands still in his pockets. He turned slightly toward his aides, nodding once to let them know it was done. The message was clear, no access, no need to push. The moment had already happened. One of the footmen, watching from a distance, exhaled like he'd been holding his breath the entire time. A steward quietly backed away down the hallway, knowing no apology or explanation would be needed. And Sergeant Merton, he never said a word, just resumed position. Silent, still, watching the corridor like nothing had happened at all. But something had. In a hallway lined with power, with memory and with protocol, one man had stood his ground against a former head of state, not with force, but with faith. Not in himself, but in the duty he'd been given. And Barack Obama, for all his years commanding global institutions, had recognized something rare. A man who didn't serve power, but protected something older than it. Obama lingered for a moment longer before turning fully toward the exit. He walked slowly, calmly, no tension in his shoulders, no trace of irritation in his pace, just a quiet, reflective calm. His aides fell into step beside him, saying nothing. They didn't need to. As he reached the edge of the corridor, he paused and looked back. Sergeant Merton was already at rest, back in position, heels aligned, hands down, gaze ahead. The same stillness, the same posture, as if the confrontation had never happened. Obama let out a soft breath, almost a chuckle. You know, he said aloud, you've got more discipline than half the politicians I've met, maybe more. Merton didn't move, but this time he replied, Discipline isn't for power, sir. It's for keeping memory intact. Obama nodded, slowly, as if he'd been waiting to hear that exact sentence without knowing it. No cameras, no orders, no spotlight. And yet here you are, still guarding a door most people don't even know exists. He smiled, small and real. Well, consider your line held, Sergeant. With that, he turned and continued down the hallway, the moment already settling behind him like dust returning to still air. The castle felt quieter now, but not because it had emptied. It was quieter because something had been understood, without being said, written, or recorded. Two men had stood in silence. One had authority, the other had permission. Only one held the line. The echoes of their departure faded with the hush of polished boots on old stone. The warmth from the reception rooms didn't reach this far. Not here. Not where memory lived behind oak and iron. Sergeant Merton remained motionless. His hands didn't twitch. His breath stayed even. But something in the corridor had changed, not because he'd stopped a man, but because he hadn't moved, because he hadn't needed to. Minutes passed. The castle returned to its rhythm. A steward passed by, offering a respectful glance but no words. One of the younger aides, trailing behind the group, slowed as he approached the guard post. He paused, standing just at the edge of the threshold, not crossing it, just looking. Then, under his breath, barely louder than a whisper, he said to the colleague beside him, "He stood his ground against a president." His companion shook his head gently. "No, he stood his ground for the Queen." Neither of them lingered. The words didn't echo, but they were heard. Sergeant Merton remained at his post, just as he had the hour before, just as he would the hour after. Some honours are pinned to the chest, others are carried in silence. And some men, without medals or headlines, preserve history simply by not stepping aside. Should a foreign leader, even a former president, ever be allowed access to a monarch's private archive? And was Sergeant Merton right to stand firm, even against a man like Barack Obama? Let us know in the comments. We read every one. If you believe some doors should only be opened by those who swore to guard them, hit that like button. Make sure you subscribe and tap the notification bell so you don't miss tomorrow's story. And if someone you know still thinks these guards are just for show, share this video with them. Other stories are already appearing on your screen. Click one now, and we'll see you tomorrow, same time, same place, with another guard story that proves tradition doesn't yield, it stands.